I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. That is Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News, coming to you to wrap up UTSA football's week two loss to Texas State 43-36. Greg, the Roadrunners fall to their Interstate 35 rival Texas State Bobcats in a kind of an odd game. Started weird, and then we saw some fireworks. And I think to summarize it, and from my standpoint, Texas State just made more plays than UTSA and came out with the win.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a lot of people panicking or upset about the result, especially just because it's the rivalry game. And, UTSA did put a lot on this, obviously coming back from last year's result and wanting to get the leg up back in the Side 35 rivalry series again. And they spent the whole offseason talking about we can't have another bad September and we need to be able to start faster. And here's all the different changes we made to try to have that happen. And so to be 0-2, I understand why people would be disappointed or upset with that. But I do think if you just compare it to last year and some of the things that were problematic, where the discipline was obviously an issue, the penalties were through the roof. It just looked like they didn't have a lot of scenarios where they just kind of didn't know what they were doing. Like they were guys who
Yeah.
are like clearly missing assignments in a way that even just as spectators we can see visually. And I did think that yesterday's game didn't look anything like that from my perspective. I thought it was a much cleaner performance overall. And it just came down to, as cliche as it might be, just seems like two really good teams, the group of five level, who had a very back and forth game. And man, we can get into all the different stats and everything, but if you look at like the advanced metrics for this one, where like your EPA per play and your success rate and all that, UTSA is slightly ahead and it's dead even. And even if you're not into that stuff, like just look at yards per play. I think it was 7.0 to 7.0 or something like that. I mean, so Texas State hit a couple of explosives that made a big difference. They had four passing plays that went for 50 or more yards, but at the end of it, the post-game win expectancy for UTSA was 55%. So this game was just like a coin flip. There's not a lot of times where you win all the metrics and you're expected to win the game and you lose anyway. That happens 4 or 5 times a week for different teams around the country. So generally, I do think it was just kind of a toss-up that they were on the wrong end of, which is new. I mean, I guess that's why that
Yeah.
could be upsetting because you used to win all your toss-ups at UTSA. But I don't think that there's signs of panic for the season. Certainly, you're going to be upset about this one, and two losses this early on is not what you're looking for. But I think there's a lot of reasons to believe this team could still have a really good year.
Yeah, I think part of it is there's a maybe an expectation that UTSA is supposed to be better than Texas State, right? There's a long history there in other sports. UTSA started the series with a 5-0 edge before, Texas State has won these last two games. So that and just the emotional part of it. I think these were two emotional games that UTSA has kind of left out on the field there. And you don't know what kind of impact that has moving forward. Jeff Traylor said he felt like this is one of the toughest non-conference schedules. So to your point, maybe they are a little bit better than they were last year, but maybe the results not going to show that. But we'll see. What do you think happens with the Roadrunners moving forward out of this one, Greg?
Yeah, before I get to that, I do think you raise a good point that the rivalry thing does obviously add to the strength of the reaction. And I think we talked about this last year, but it still seems true that the Kinney's side of it and Texas State's side of it still seems to have that kind of chip on their shoulder about UTSA winning the first five matchups. It still feels like, and this is just based on what they say in interviews. I don't know how they talk about it behind closed doors, but it does still seem like the rivalry side means a lot to Texas State and maybe not quite as much to the UTSA end because, last year Kenny said the comment in postgame about how every recruiting move and personnel decision that they
Yeah.
made was tied to trying to beat UTSA, which was just you don't hear stuff like that very often, which was I thought pretty telling. But then even this year, he mentioned kind of in passing in their press conferences through the week that they had started prep on UTSA through fall camp and that had been sort of instead of just looking at only your first opponent, they were already kind of scouting the Roadrunners and planning for what that would look like. And we asked UTSA some of those same questions, and maybe they were just a coordinated effort to lie to us, but it sounded like they did preseason camp the way you always do. You're just kind of working internally, and then they gave 2 weeks to Texas A&M, and then they looked at Texas State after that. So it still doesn't necessarily feel like just based on what they tell us that they treat it with the same gravity that Texas State treats it. And so that's just interesting because clearly it means more to the fan bases, and maybe it's worth something to put a little bit of extra effort into that. In terms of where UTSA goes from here, I think. Like I said, I think they're probably going to be pretty fine. I mean, they should beat Incarnate Word. That shouldn't be a huge test. Obviously, Incarnate Word's a pretty good team at the FCS level, but they've already proven that they can lose games to FCS teams, having gone down to Nickel State. It doesn't seem like maybe it's too early to say what they're going to be capable of this year, but they're certainly not, um, a level above what UTSA's faced so far, right? Like that's going to be a much easier challenge for them in the big picture compared to Texas State and Texas A&M. And then going forward from there, you look at the league, most importantly. I mean, we can talk about Colorado State, but they got pushed by an FCS team
Yep,
yesterday. I'm not thinking that they're going to be super elite, but you never want to have to go on the road against anybody. So, and then you get into conference, and it looks like there's a couple games on there with how Tulane and USF have played that are going to be really, really tough to win.
yep, yep.
And then there's still a lot of winnable games on that schedule too. So I don't think that they're, out of it at all by just kind of based on what we've seen so far, that they're not the kind of team that sort of figures out where we thought they might in terms of being like sort of in that like somewhere between the third to sixth best team in the conference. Like I think that's still kind of the range that they fall in based on what we've seen so far.
Let's get into a little bit analysis of this actual game. Jeff Traylor said something like it was a little bit surprising that the offense started slower than they thought they would be. But for me, this one boils down to the play defensively, right? I think Texas State had four explosive plays, totaling more than 50% of their total offense. How do you break this one down? Now, obviously, we could start on one side of the ball or the other, but for me, I think the biggest concern coming out of this game is the defense. There's a lack of pressure being put on. Then there's coverage issues that I don't know how UTSA fixes that moving forward.
100%. Yeah, it's funny because it's sort of the reverse of last year. Obviously, the result of the game was a lot different, but the the conversation last year was, okay, we have everybody back on defense and we have a bunch of new guys on offense, and so the defense will have to carry us. And then in that Texas State game, the defense did not do their job, especially out of the gate. And this year, it's the offense is going to have to carry this kind of overhauled defense, and the offense didn't do their job out of the gate. Where at the end of the first quarter, it's 2-0, and obviously they got it going from there. But I do think overall, when the opponent scores 40 something points, I do think it's fair to say the defense was the bigger issue. And what's at least sort of validating from what we've been talking about for the last few months is it's the areas that we've been flagging.
Yeah,
Cornerback, like who are the guys going to be? And we sort of knew Davin Martin would be one, and then I guess KK Meyer and Jacavian Rogers ended up getting into the mix. And after that, it's like you're talking in the walk-on range pretty quickly. And
right.
those guys just didn't have the tools to consistently cover Texas State's receivers. It seems like a lot of the times it looked like zone from what I could tell. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I think especially this weekend, Texas State and Texas A&M, they have tried to avoid the one-on-one matchups
yep.
because of this
Help
issue that
to
we're talking
help. Yeah, to
about.
help
Right.
with coverage. Yeah,
But it's still like there's still breakdowns happening,
yeah,
or the way that Texas State's offense operates with all that deep choice stuff that they do, I think it's still pretty similar to how Incarnate Word operates. So I'm a little bit familiar with it. It's just whatever they can see out of your coverage. If you're going to play zone, there's an option built into that to beat the.
somewhere. Yeah,
So so they just have, if as long as the receivers are diagnosing the defense correctly on the fly, then they're going to find the openings in that zone. And I think we saw them be able to do that a decent amount. So that's just sort of the way that offense is designed to put up points and yards,
yeah,
and as well as they did. And UTSA, I just don't think has the answers. And the other part of that is the pass rush, which we talked about.
yep.
I mean, we knew coming into the year, even if
Outside
Cam
linebacker.
yeah,
Yeah,
even if Cam Cooper was going to be 100% healthy at will linebacker, we hadn't seen proof that he could be a 10 sack guy or even a 5 sack guy. It's just he's a player who came in as a tight end and moved it inside linebacker and then moved
yep.
to outside linebacker and showed some flashes and got everybody excited and certainly made an impression on his teammates to earn a single digit. Like he could have been primed for a big year, but we didn't have any proof of that. So, that was going to be a question regardless. And then you lose your number one guy at the position. And, Jeff Traylor is usually he'll either say something nice about a player or he'll say nothing about a player. And we ask him about Vic Shaw and Don Munnerlin, and it's like this is a work in progress. Like
Right.
and
Literally. Yeah.
he's not usually that
No.
critical or candid of guys, and most of the guys you're relying on at arguably the most important position on the defense. So I just think it's probably not super surprising that they weren't able to generate pressure. The question is always, are there things that you need to be scheming up or
Yes.
finding
Yes.
creative blitzes to sort of
Right.
to generate that in a way that it doesn't happen naturally with the guys you have on the field. But at a certain point, somebody's just got to get to the passer. So I think there's both of those things can be true.
Yeah, I think so. At one point, Vic Shaw went down, and It was Don Munderland in there, I think, in the fourth quarter, and it's like, this is not what I think they envisioned. But I do think there's room for that area to grow, right, as the season goes on. Look, let's give Texas State some credit that was a good quarterback, right? Even when they did get to him and they did have him that first 73-yard play, he was under pressure and just kind of made an amazing pass. And even their running back was kind of hard to contain when they had him kind of boxed in. They always had positive yardage. So let's give some credit there, I think.
Yeah, the only scary thing is when Casey Concepcion and Mario Craver are slipping through your defense, you're like, okay, well, those guys are really good. That's just going to happen. And when Texas State's people are doing it, it's okay. How many teams is this going to be an issue against? Is it becoming more of a red flag in terms of their
Yeah,
ability just to be able to track guys down and keep them under wraps? Because those guys did look very fast and slippery, but they didn't always look very fast and slippery against Eastern Michigan. I mean,
right.
I know they got there eventually in terms of the offensive production, but there were some slow spurts in that game as well. So I do think that it's something like if UIW's guys look really fast and slippery too, then at a certain point there's a bigger issue there. But I do think that yeah, it's fair to give Texas State some credit for their offensive talent because especially Brad Jackson at quarterback really looked I think comfortable and confident in an environment with 40 something thousand fans to be able to step up and still keep it like it's one thing to step up and dump it off or step up and get a couple yards on a scramble, but to buy time and step up and then hit a 50-yard pass down the field is a level of composure that's kind of rare.
Yep. No, I thought they played well. Let's just put a cap on the defense here, Greg. Is there anything beyond scheme changes that can be done at this point? I know they're banged up. We didn't see Ty Leonard. It looks like Jamarius Lewis at safety still isn't back. I think we got to ask about, cornerback health at some point when if and when those guys are going to come back that are not playing. Um, Beyond that, is it just going to be you got to scheme these guys up to get better?
Do you think are there guys that you are expecting at corner that we haven't seen? I mean, I guess Zach
Zach
Morris.
Morris would be the one would be the one contributor I'd have my eye on. I don't think we've
Yeah.
seen anything out of him yet, and just where the new corner is at that transferred in a few weeks ago, right? I mean, at some point you're gonna have to throw these guys into the fire, and maybe 2 weeks is too close to for that for him for Chapman, but we'll see.
Yeah, because I realized when I was going through pregame, they have Armani Rue, the
Yep.
transfer, and I was looking for him because he didn't play against A&M, and I was okay, is he injured or something? But he was dressed out, and I don't know if he was dressed out last week, but I don't think he ended up playing a ton in this game. It seems like they just don't have a lot of guys they're confident in. So, given that Zach Morris has played, I would think that if he's healthy, he'll be out there, but it's been a while since he seemed healthy yet. It hasn't. I don't know if we saw him much during the preseason at all. So it remains to be seen how long that concern is going to linger. We saw Jamarius Lewis played a few snaps in this game. He
Yep.
didn't he didn't start, but he was back a little bit. And then obviously Ty Leonard is a big loss, but it's crazy. This is sort of a side note, but how deep that they rotate on the defensive line. We
Yeah,
always
they're
talk
pretty
about
good.
this, but there's just the amount of guys that I have to check the roster still. I mean, I know it's
Yep.
only two, but usually we're pretty on top of that stuff. And I'm like, who's Donald Quiate? I don't know. I don't know how you say his name, but
Yeah.
like, there's just these people who they're rotating 10 or 12 guys up there, even with an injury to Ty Leonard. So, um, yeah, I think definitely maybe Zach Morris does make a big difference. It wasn't like he was, this all conference level guy when he was there last year, but it's just somebody who's solid and has some experience would make a big difference at this point. So I don't think that you can put it on the injuries. I think it might just be a work in progress to get those guys maybe still meshing together as
Yep.
an
Yep.
entirely new
I
starting
do.
11. But at least there's some bright spots. Like I think
KK Meyer had some plays, but he also got beat a few times. Same with
yeah.
Davin.
I think Shad Banks and
Yeah,
Kendrick Shire in particular have kind of over delivered on what you'd expect, and I think they probably still feel good about that group of Marcellus Wilkerson and Owen Pee Wee
on
over there
P.
at the same spot. So they have a couple of spots that they probably feel pretty solidified about, and if they can take some steps in the other areas, then maybe they can still get to an adequate level. I don't think it's going to be an elite defense this year, but they can get to a pretty adequate level.
Yeah, I do think, and I said this somewhere in the preseason. Maybe this may be a unit that gets better as the season goes on. So we'll see how that goes, and we'll ask those questions, see if we can find out some of those answers. Greg, let's jump to the offensive side. Uh, uh, I mean, just the Roadrunners just simply couldn't keep up, right? I think we saw Texas State was six straight scoring drives at one point, and UTSA was doing pretty well there themselves after they got into a groove, but just a handful of plays I think cost them some key drops. I don't know if you want to just start there on the final series. UTSA's defense comes up with the stop at the end of the game. UTSA has a 2 minute drive in order with a chance to force overtime or go for the win with a 2 point conversion, and we see two drops from two of UTSA's sure-handed receivers.
Yeah, I think that was something that kind of got lost in everything else that happened in the game, but just the overall like flow and sequence of the game was so crazy.
Choppy. It was
It
choppy.
it was like how, UTSA is going for it on 4th and 7 from their own side of the field. And you understand why, because after they score a touchdown, Texas State scores on one play. And it's
One play. Yeah,
clearly this is why they're gonna go for it on 4th down, because they don't think they can get a stop. And then somehow in the final 10 minutes they get two stops back to back.
which is
And
crazy.
and
Yes.
so and so you think we've seen this movie before where UTSA is down 7 in the Alamo Dome with the ball and 2 minutes left, and you just kind of think, okay, I guess they're going to go down and score. That's just sort of what we've seen from this team, and that's when the offense that obviously was pretty productive to get close to 500 yards of total offense ends up not being able to come up with the plays that they need in those moments. And I do think that a lot of it comes down to the drops, like you said, where maybe that hurts Owen McCown's ability to get into a little bit of a rhythm at quarterback. He finished 23 of 43, which is not a great percentage,
Yeah,
especially by his
53.
standards. When
Yeah.
they throw a lot of different screens and stuff, they're supposed to be pretty high percentage plays, but when the guys aren't going to be able to hold on to the ball, it just becomes harder to get into that rhythm and to keep the chains moving. And right, obviously Robert Henry did his part. The fourth
Yeah.
straight game, he's got at least 150 yards and two touchdowns. So maybe that is just sort of the new normal for him, as crazy as that is. So that'll be something that they can continue to lean on. But generally, the passing game has to be a little bit more consistent, and some of that is, I still feel like we see Owen not even necessarily miss throws, but just, well, there is some of that, but also the throws that he does make just aren't as precise as we've gotten used to. I think maybe there's just something he's going to work his way into through the year as we get deeper into the season, where he just kind of starts to feel that rhythm a little bit more, but just not perfectly accurate the way we've seen at times last year. So I think that part of it falls on him, but part of it falls on the guys not being able to make the catches as well. There was 4 or 5 drops that were pretty critical.
Yeah, I like what we've seen out of Robert Henry and the offensive line from a rushing production. I almost want to see Robert get the ball 20 times a game, right? To see what he could do with that. But I understand wanting to stay multiple. Look, it's week two, right? Obviously, UTSA didn't do a lot of stuff at Texas State because they didn't want to or at Texas A&M because they didn't want to put stuff on film. But I think we saw more of a true offensive kind of mindset in week two where they did run, they did have their screen passes, and they did try some down the field passing attempts. And for me, my biggest concern coming out of this game, outside of the defensive pass coverage and the defensive pass pressure, is the passing offense, right? You see, they're pretty good at their screenplays and their intermediate passes, but I think 2 for 10 on down the field passes, and a lot of those, to your point, they weren't misses. Maybe they were miscommunications sometimes. It just doesn't look like both sides of the pass and catch parties are on the same page all the time. And I think that kind of hurts their consistency and rhythm.
And that's funny because you would think with so many guys back that they'd really be in sync in that way, but there was something certainly that wasn't connecting there. And again, especially at home, you would expect that it would be easy to have that kind of thing work out where the guys are all on the same page. But for whatever reason, to your point, yeah, this was there was just sometimes that they certainly felt out of sync, especially as you tried to go farther down the field where, the ball gets thrown and the guy's still kind of looking for it. The receiver's not exactly sure where it is, and then it lands near him, and they weren't able to make the play. There was at least 2 or 3 of those. So, do you want to talk about the play calling? That's always everybody gets all riled up about the play calling.
Let's go. Let's bring it up. I was just gonna ask you what you thought about the play calling. There was one point during the game, and I turned to you, Greg, and I said, one time one of these screenplays is going to work. And you replied, well, that one picked up 7 yards. It worked.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I don't. I don't have a super firm grasp of exactly what the concern is. I mean, this is just sort of a thing that happens when where you don't win the game, you just blame the coordinators. So, and it's just funny because we did this last year, right? Where the first half of the season, everybody wanted to fire everybody, and then by the end of the year, it was one of their best coaching jobs. So, I guess we're just going to go down that path again and do all the same stuff we've already done. But you want to be critical of the run pass balance. Well, that if you take out the last drive with 2 minutes left, it was 37 passes versus 34 runs. So
Yeah,
to say that it was super predictable is tough, especially, you look at Owen McCown's passing chart and there's 12 zones if you break it down, and he threw multiple passes into 10 of those zones. So they're clearly attacking different parts of the field and they're attacking in different ways in terms of the run pass balance. If you want to be critical of some of the fourth down stuff, I mean, that's not really a play calling issue. That's probably coming from the head coach more than anybody else. But certainly on 4th and 1, um, if you want to take the field goal in a game where the teams combined for 80 points, you're just wrong. And if you want to make the argument that Robert Henry should have been on the field, I'll hear you on that one. That makes a
yeah.
lot of sense to me. I think they just wanted to give it to Amarian Peterson because he's the slightly bigger
Bigger
back.
back. Yeah,
That's just what you do at the goal line. I don't really understand why, when they've shown the ability to line up under center, that you wouldn't turn to that in that scenario to have to run the inside zone out of the shotgun, or I don't even know if it's inside zone, just the inside run out of the shotgun when you have the ability to line up under center. And we even saw they brought what Patrick Overmeyer took a snap
yeah,
and did
yeah,
like a QB sneak play. So they have different ways that we've seen. I mean, I loved the play with Oscar Cardenas where he would motion and then come under center and then
yep.
sneak it. Like that was a fun one too. So, they've shown different ways that they can try to get a yard, and I guess they were just confident enough that they could line up normal and do it there.
I think
That-
someone was in motion on that fourth down play
yeah,
where
right,
Amari
right.
Peter. So
So
I
they
think,
gave him that
yeah,
look potentially, I guess,
yeah,
right? So, but it's just difficult because maybe this isn't a good analogy, but I think of it like if you're going to be critical of a meteorologist or something, right? Like the people, like what you see, and if somebody tells you it's supposed to look like this and it doesn't look like that, you can get mad about it. But they're working with so much more information in terms of what
yeah,
they've done in practice that works. I've heard the example before of like we repped this play 50 times and then that guy tweaked his hamstring in pregame and now we can't do that play anymore. And so
yeah,
or even just opposing opponent trends, like what works
yeah,
against them, what doesn't. Like they're just so much more locked in on this stuff than, and I think so it's really hard to be critical from the outside unless you have a really really firm trend line that you can follow of where things
yeah,
don't work. And it's a sense like, because I don't want to say that they're immune to criticism either, that's not right, but we've seen that this group can have success where by the end of last year, people were really optimistic about the play calling. We weren't having
yeah,
these conversations anymore. So again, I guess we're just gonna have to repeat the same pattern. We're early in the
yeah.
year, we act like the sky's falling, and then probably by the end, they're going to be at a place where you feel pretty good about it. Because I don't think it was a bad offensive performance yesterday. They had close to 500 yards. They scored 36
Right.
points. They averaged 7 yards a snap. Like I just don't think that was necessarily a huge issue. And if you want to, I might feel different in a few hours after I've watched the game back. But from seeing it yesterday and just looking at the numbers, it's hard for me to imagine that there's a ton of room to be super critical about the play calling.
Yeah, if you scored 36 points, you should be in a solid position to win the game, and no turnovers, limited mistakes, a few MAs. But Greg, let's just kind of recap all of this. Like UTSA is a RPO offense, right? So a lot of that is dictated on what Owen sees at the line. So it may not be a play call for a 5 yard slant, right?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, there's always sort of different directions that he can take it based on what he sees. It seems like he does have a lot of freedom, and you don't always see him moving guys around a ton or having to shout out a lot of different stuff. I think sometimes he's comfortable just going with the call as it's made, but it is something that there's even that's a great point because even if the play call seems bad, it could have been correct a different option
Option,
that
right.
might have been pursued. So yeah, I don't know. It's just this is just such a normal thing to happen, I guess, where
Yeah.
if you don't win the game, you just blame the coordinators. And we can talk about if you want to, there's other people, they want to talk about the defensive coordinator and the
Yep.
defensive
Yep.
calling. And I don't know what you want them to do. Like, I don't think they have a lot of guys that they can rely on to hang against an offense like that. So, we talked about how it seems like the zone sort of makes sense just because you don't like a lot of your one-on-one matchups, but then that does kind of tie your hands with how many guys you can bring in pressure because you got to cover the field with defenders. So I think maybe there, if you want to do some criticizing there, I think we've seen in the past they've had some success with these corner blitzes and stuff. It
Yep.
feels like they utilize that a lot more than a lot of other teams. And so if you want to see them dial up some more of that because they're not getting pressure, but against these spread offenses where they have a lot of options built in, somebody fills that space usually underneath.
Very quickly.
There's some
Yeah.
kind of route that they can get out of um, where just because you brought a guy on pressure, unless it's somebody that's immediately at the line of scrimmage, that extra split second to cover that ground is the ball's already out a lot of
Yeah.
times. So that's why you see against these kind of air raid type of systems or things that are in that family that usually people seem to think that it makes a lot more sense to try to play coverage and take your chances that way than to try to rush the passer because they have all these outlets built in. So, they would know better than I would if that was sort of the scenario that they were cooking with and working against in this one. But I just think it's very easy to be critical, and it's a lot harder to come up with what you would have wanted them to do instead.
Right.
I don't think there's
Right.
easy answers.
Yeah. And I think to my point, I'll just put a bow on this is the offense is, I think, always going to go for the most part as Owen goes. He's been under 60% completion these first two games of the season, but he was the highest graded player on the team yesterday overall. So, I mean, you take the good and the bad, right, and just kind of sort it out.
Yeah, I mean, like if Owen McCown is the problem with your offense, you have a really good offense because I still think he's a very good quarterback. And maybe there's been some things in this week where some of the preseason hype, and I'm not pointing to anybody but myself of saying he's potentially one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback in the group of five. Maybe I feel less good about that just based on
But
some
we're
of the
two games in, Greg.
right. But
Nobody's
so
handing out trophies after two
so
weeks.
he could still get there. I wouldn't make that same claim if I was talking on some of these radio hits and
Yeah.
podcasts now, but by the end of the year, maybe I'm back to feeling that way. So, it hasn't been the most incredible start to the season for him where I thought we might see him jump up a level and be a completely different player. I do think it seems like maybe decision making and stuff like that, he might be more confident than last year, but I don't think just the execution and being
Right.
on all of his passes has been perfect to this point,
Yep.
which is kind of a surprise. But just something that might potentially get worked out as we go along. And then there's always the like, we'll find out way later that he had whatever injury or something like that. Like there's
Who
always some
knows?
caveat
Who
that could
knows?
be going
Yeah.
on there too. So it doesn't seem like that's in play right now, but I know you at one point were, wanted to watch the replay of him leaving the field and see if he might have been nursing something. So
Yeah.
you just never know what's going on with that kind of stuff too. So you can't do that for everybody because you just end up making excuses for people the whole time. But point is, I wouldn't be worried about Owen McCown at quarterback. If some one or two people, I'm sure in your mentions talking about Brandon Tennyson, like I just don't want to hear any of that.
No Brandon Tennyson hype over here, although I did respect what he did at Texas A&M. Greg, let's talk a little bit. I rewatched the game this morning. A special teams gaff to start the game on a punt. It looked like maybe a rugby style snap for a non-rugby style punt, and that led to 2 points. Other than that, I don't know that the coverage teams are as crisp as they wanted to. They've obviously faced some really speedy returners and dynamic guys, but what do you make of UTSA special teams through 2 weeks?
Yeah, in the first quarter, I mean, I ended up writing it anyway because I had already decided to write about it. But the special teams error on the punt was it seemed like the long snapper kind of like double clutched it, like he almost pump faked the snap, and then it ended up going way off the mark. And so obviously that was a pretty costly play. I think the kickoff specialist, Murphy, I think there's sort of an expectation that he needs to put the ball out of the back of the end zone every time, or at least have it be deep enough that it's not returnable. I'm trying to pull up the numbers now as we're talking about it, but certainly Texas State was able to get a few kickoff returns out
I
of what they were.
did I did look at the comparison, and it looked like what UTSA had and what Texas State had were pretty similar in terms of yardage.
Yeah, I know there was a couple returns that Texas State had that were like 30 plus,
Yeah,
put them in pretty good field position. So I don't know that the coverage team is incredible in that sense, but I do think that a big part of that is probably that they just need to kick the ball out of the end zone as much as possible. The expectation there is probably just that they can have a touchback more often than not, especially in the Alamo Dome. So I
yeah.
was surprised that there were even that many kickoff returns that were available to be played. I think that's probably where you start with looking at that, but certainly there was not, the punt coverage against A&M was hugely problematic.
Yeah.
I didn't have as many punts in this game, so I guess there
Right.
was
Yeah.
there were fewer opportunities to see that rear its head. But generally speaking, it felt like they did a pretty good job of that. They had one that they downed like inside the 5, right? Something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, they
So
pinned them. Yeah.
so yeah, It's not necessarily solved, but I don't think it's a huge red flag. I don't know, where do you come down on that?
I'm a work in progress guy. I think you just got to keep tra look, there's nothing they could do about the specialists and who they have at these positions at this point of the season. You have what you have. So as long as they continually, we didn't see any field goal attempts this week, so that's going to be the big question moving forward in my head. But as long as they continually show some marginal improvement from week to week, I think that's just the best you could hope for.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think kicker is still, we have to wait and see. I mean, so Petro hit the easy one in College Station, and then in the wind, 45 yards or whatever was way off, but the wind might have been a pretty significant factor in
Yep.
that one. Not
Made
going to
all
be the
those
only windy,
PATs.
not going to be the only windy game of the year, so I
Yep.
guess you can't just sort of write that one off. But yeah, good point. If you make the
Yep.
PATs, you got the operation down pretty well, I guess.
Let's put a ball on this one, Greg. The Roadrunners are 0-2 to start the season. Two pretty emotional losses. I think we're both in the same boat that the sky is not falling despite an 0-2 record. I had UTSA maybe going 2-2 in conference play. Greg, what happens to the Roadrunners coming out of this one? Are they still able to pick up the pieces and have a pretty good season?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned, going back to the sky is not falling. When they were 11-0, we did the thing where it's like, they could have lost some of these games. Like, this is awesome and they're really great, but they're not probably actually a top 25 team. Like, we have to keep reasonable expectations as we go forward into future seasons. And then now last year we were in the same boat but the opposite, where they were, I think, 2-4 overall, maybe 1-4 when you get rid of the FCS game. And we're saying, they lost some close games here, and this team has shown that it can kind of pick it up as the year goes on, and that they've been slow starters traditionally. And so maybe let's not panic. And that worked out pretty well for us too, that they ended up finishing as strong as they did to still have a winning record, and that the vibes were pretty positive about this team as the year ended. So I think this year we might be in kind of the same boat where people are going to panic a little bit because they've never been 0-2 under trailer. I mean, it's a product of who you played and how you built the schedule, that you haven't faced your FCS team, or you haven't faced some Kennesaw State level opponent at this point of the season. But it is still a first to be 0-2. But I think whatever kind of emotional damage that does within the building can't be that different from how they started last year. So even though it's a lot of new guys, there are plenty of people on this roster who have been through low points before and believe in their ability to rebound and recover. If the culture survived as well as it did with the slow start last year, that they were able to stick to what they believe in and round into form later in the year, then I don't think this 0-2 start, especially because how quickly you forget that they felt pretty good about, how A&M went, right?
Yep.
So, and Coach Traylor said it's dangerous to have that much praise when you didn't actually win the game. You don't want to get too full of yourself after a loss, but really they're kind of like 1-1 in terms of vibes, if that
Yeah.
makes.
Yeah.
So I think that it's not going to take a lot of work, I wouldn't think, to get back on track and to have, especially with the schedule that they have upcoming, to hopefully be able to view Incarnate Word. I mean, obviously, I have to take them seriously, but
Yeah.
from our perspective, to think of that more as like a tune-up or get right game, I
Yeah.
think put them right back on track for where they need to be.
Yep. And I just for the record, Greg, I do think the vibe checks are important. I think sometimes we learn more about what's actually going on with the team than, asking why did you go for it on fourth down and why
Well, yeah,
did you
sure.
go for it on fourth down, right?
I mean, I think, yeah, because you can walk into an interview with an idea of what you want the message to be and then ask questions that take it that way. Or you could kind of give them the freedom to tell you what's going on. And that sometimes gives them too much room to paint a rosier picture than really exists. But yeah, sometimes it's just good to sort of just give them nothing and see what they do with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like,
Yeah.
tell us what's going on. So yeah, I have no issue with that. And I think that this week will be an interesting time to get a measuring stick on that.
Yep, I do too. We'll ask the questions, we'll report the answers, and I guess we'll see each other back after next week's game at U against UIW. For now, I'm JJ Perez. Appreciate you guys watching. That is Greg Luca with the San Antonio Express News. We'll see y'all next week.